Hey folks, if you're looking for an in-depth indie review, you're in the right place. As for today, I'm going to be tackling Night Dive Studios' System Shock, a remake of Looking Glass's sci-fi horror immersive sim. That said, was this experience electrifying or a system failure? I'm your host Arlian, let's find out together. Sometimes things go a little awry, like when a nameless hacker gets caught trying to steal military-grade cyber implants from a mega corporation, which in turn leads to his door getting kicked in by hired goons. That's not the worst of it, though. The hacker, having been taken to Tri-Optimum Citadel space station, is given a choice by its CEO, Edward Diego. Remove the ethics software from the station's AI, Shodan, or take a first-class ticket out of an airlock with no spacesuit. This goes about as swimmingly as you'd expect, given that Shodan proceeds to commit increasingly escalating atrocities to the crew of the Citadel in the name of achieving AI apotheosis in order to satisfy her god complex. The only reason you're not subject to the same is because Diego saw fit to hide your presence on the ship in case you proved useful later, though it's not long until you be getting Shodan's undivided attention. As for how it's executed, while the opening cutscene lays out the basic premise, the meat of the narrative is provided to the player through exploration. Audio and text logs lay scattered throughout the station, providing insight into Citadel's steady decline, as well as clues to the various puzzles you'll encounter. There's also logs by Shodan, which, in tandem with her taunting announcements, do a solid job of exuding a certain degree of menace. What's more, there is some decent environmental storytelling to encounter, though the majority of it comes mostly in the form of figuring out how people live their daily lives in the Citadel, or how they died. But how does it play? Well, I personally came into this after having played System Shock 2, and my immediate thought was harder, in large part because this doesn't have the RPG elements of the sequel and leans a lot harder into immersive sim but survival horror. I'm not kidding here either. While there's certainly some first-person shooter elements, both ammo and healing are relatively scarce, forcing you to make good use of your limited resources and to scavenge anything and everything that is nailed down. Which is then further complicated by your overall limited inventory space. While there is a pair of later game upgrades that improve its overall capacity by a row in total, you will be obliged to play loot Tetris throughout your playthrough, and even that isn't enough since I wound up using a cortege of boxes in a room on the maintenance floor to hold all of my excess gear and ammo in one centrally connected spot. It's a lot. And only further compounded by yet another survival horror element, your enemies. While they start out relatively simple with some shambling cyber zombies and reprogrammed robots, it's not long until you start to encounter enemies capable of picking you off at a distance, which is then further compounded by the fact that the various enemies you encounter all have different weaknesses and resistances, which can potentially invalidate portions of your arsenal or at least make it highly inefficient. And all of these, save for certain unique enemies, will respawn, making your time in Citadel Station a harrowing race against time as you try and figure out your next goal before all of your ammunition runs out. Which is a bit of a problem given how sprawling the stages are. Seriously, there's so much to do on each of these floors and so much to discover given how porous these areas are, courtesy of alternate avenues to advance and numerous shortcuts and secret passages. That said, it behooves you to at least do it somewhat quickly, since while death is initially a bit of a game stopper, there is a silver lining of sorts. On most floors, there's a cyborg conversion room, which can be converted into a respawn room, allowing you to recover with little penalty save lost time. While there are some areas or encounters where you'll stay dead, these help a great deal towards mitigating the overall difficulty of the game. Though I'd say that honor is shared equally with the security rating system. See, Shodan's presence on each floor isn't just a nebulous thing. You can actually destroy security cameras and hidden node clusters in order to reduce it. As it lowers, enemy spawns are reduced in turn until they eventually stop altogether, allowing you to rummage around or backtrack to earlier segments in relative peace. Which helps a lot, since I spent a fair portion of my playthrough doing just that, because, well, System Shock does not hold your hand insofar as objectives. I mean, it doesn't really hold your hand insofar as anything, but While it provides you with overarching tasks to achieve, the finer points of it require you to pay close attention to the various logs you encounter, as well as remembering various points of interest on different floors, which was a bit of a problem for me at first, given my memory is potatoes, but I got into the habit of leaving map markers on anything that stuck out to my brain early on. It just would have really helped if I could have labeled what they were, but yeah. I might have also partly brought this on myself by cranking the difficulty of the puzzle in this game to max. C'est la vie. Really, I think my biggest regret about my difficulty decision is how hard it made a certain optional chess game, since otherwise I enjoyed the other puzzle minigames you can engage with, even if they did occasionally stump me for a few minutes. That said, the rewards for exploring do feel great. There's a lot of different weapons to find, all of which have different firing modes in order to help you better tackle the enemies in your way. What's more, exploring for secrets thoroughly can often grant you access to high-powered weapons several stages earlier than you normally find them, alongside ammo caches. Not to mention the weapon upgrades scrolled about the station, which can notably empower your gear in a variety of ways, though a few will cause them to become bulkier and overall mess with your inventory Tetris setup. That said, the real game changer is likely the augments. Essentially, these are passive or toggleable abilities you can find. Well, some are subtle, like being able to figure out what a dermal patch will do to you, and for how long. Others are blatant, such as a damage shield against energy weapons, the most prominent kind of damage, or detecting items within a certain distance, which also serves as a decent way to sniff out secrets. Really, the only downside is that these take energy, a resource that's also shared with some of your weapons, which will require you to crack into your battery stash like they were a can of Pringles, or find the recharge points in a given map. Either way, it's something to manage, as is the process of hacking. See, while there's a simple puzzle-oriented minigame associated with certain bits of rewiring, that isn't this game's version of hacking. Rather, there are segments where you'll enter cyberspace and engage in some more traditional FPS combat that feels a bit like Descent, albeit trippier. It's not actually bad for a change of pace, though it can get a bit brutal when the game decides to spawn a bunch of enemies from all sides in a tightly packed room. Thankfully, dying doesn't game you over on the default difficulty, instead only reducing your current health. Less thankfully, a late-game hacking node in the maintenance floor hampered my abilities to progress for some time, crashing repeatedly whenever I tried to exit the stage. Yeah. For all of the elements of the game that I enjoy, the fact that myself and many others had to bypass the segments with janky solutions like intentionally dying to get kicked out of the stage after breaking the objective in order to progress is... yeah, that is a whole thing. That is in fact how you will have to get out of that situation right now in order to advance through the game. There isn't really another way. That said, System Shock is the sum of its parts, and there is one element I haven't talked about yet. So, on the whole, I quite appreciate the game's graphics, as it does a solid job of making the game a lot more palatable. On the whole, I really appreciate exploring Citadel Station and going toe-to-toe with the various technological and/or mutated aberrations lurking within its corridors. That said, I do have a slight nitpick, and it loops right back to those secrets I mentioned earlier. See, while you can sometimes find some nooks through clever platforming, others are hidden behind false walls, which wouldn't be so much of a problem were it not for the fact that there isn't really anything to help distinguish them from normal walls. The original game actually would highlight and mark them as a secret door if you scrolled over them, so you can expect to do a lot of wall humping in order to suss them out, which is then made even more annoying once you factor in that there's certain secret doors that only open at security level 0. A mechanic that I don't actually remember being explained anywhere, but yes, that's another benefit to hitting all of those security nodes and cameras on a stage. On the other hand, there's the sound design, and well, on the whole, I generally think it's quite good. The voice acting is solid, and it's a really nice touch that they have the original voice actors for Shodan here. It's also quite good that you can determine the proximity of an enemy due to their ambient noises, which can be an absolute lifesaver while also helping to build up tension. That said, there's another nitpick here, and this time it's with the music. While there are fun tracks, there's a bit of awkwardness with the way that battle music is handled, since it will sometimes kick in the moment an enemy aggroes on you, even if you proceed to leave a room immediately, and it will then linger for some time, leading to some awkward shifts in mood where you're just in an empty hallway while some enemy is still mad at you several rooms away. Anyways, this is a whole lot of words, so let's sum things up nicely for the conclusion. There's a lot of things I enjoy in System Shock. While the game is thoroughly challenging, you're provided a fair amount of flexibility insofar as the difficulty, with modular options like changing how brutal the enemies are, tweaking the puzzle difficulty, like I said I cranked mine, upping the overall difficulty of the game vis-a-vis a stringent time limit and an Iron Mode-esque permadeath if you haven't activated the floor's med centers, as well as cranking cyberspace up so it kills you too. That said, it was a bit disheartening to parse together how much of my experience was randomly wandering around, trying to figure out where to go and what to do next. Something which is only exacerbated by the sizable amount of backtracking you'll be doing, which you can expect to do when you die too, given if you die on certain floors, you'll need to make some decent hikes and deal with multiple loading screens to get back to where you were. It's definitely punishing. I mean, I could have told you it was definitely punishing. I mean, there were points where I was just picking up weapons enemies dropped so I could empty the ammo out of those weapons and hoard them. All of that said, the slow sense of progression as my arsenal built up and I became better equipped to deal with the station's threat does feel satisfying. And I'll admit that even when I felt a bit run down, the game's storytelling and ambience made me hungry to continue, even despite the hurdles. It's just, all of these factors when put together do make this game a bit of a harder sell. There's definite flaws which crop up in the experience, which had me second guessing myself insofar as its rating, because if you're looking for something challenging or a reason to either visit or revisit this franchise, this certainly does provide. That said, it's definitely a daunting experience and one that does have certain failings, rough edges, compounded by a very nasty bug, and I ultimately have to call this game a fumble, albeit at the very cusp of being a hit. I want to recommend this to everyone, I really do, but it's just not quite there yet. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. And if you enjoy my efforts to create new indie reviews, interviews, and gaming content, hit the subscribe button and the bell. Also, check the description for a link to my Discord, the Crit Hit Cauldron, and to my Patreon if you're curious to see reviews before they hit YouTube. You can also support me by snagging merch, since I have some neat coffee mugs, mouse pads, and shirts over at the little store in the description. There's also a Twitch if you want to see me occasionally do the busy work for all of these reviews and gathering footage. That said, I'll catch you in the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.